Afternoon. Welcome to today's CEOS Cultural Economics online seminar, which is part of the Association for Cultural Economics International Activities. I'm Elisabetta Lazzaro, the CEOS Coordinator, Professor of Creative and Cultural Industries Management at the Business School for the Creative Industries at the University for the Creative Arts in the UK. Today's CEOS is on public funding, performing arts and artistic output. We will investigate and discuss to what extent live performing arts have been depending on public funding and how has that affected their artistic quality and output. This seminar will combine an historical economic perspective applied to Italian theaters, contributed by Michela Giorcelli and Petra Moser. Unfortunately, Petra cannot make it today. And with current artistic and managerial challenges and solutions at renowned opera house Teatro La Fenice in Venice, contributed by Fortunato Ortombina and Andrea Erri. Let me briefly introduce today's speakers. Michela Giorcelli is an associate professor at the Department of Economics at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, and research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. Petra Moser is a professor of economics at New York University Stern and research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. Michela and Petra research combines methods from economic history and applied economics, microeconomics, sorry. This year, they published the paper Defunding the Arts Effects on Creativity. Fortunato Ortombina is a CEO and artistic director at Teatro La Fenice in Venice. He holds musical arts, composition, and musicology degrees at the Conservatoire and the University of Parma. He published on Italian operatic theater during the Napoleonic occupation. Andrea Erri is general manager, finance and marketing departments at Teatro La Fenice in Venice. He's also adjunct professor of cultural management at Ca' Foscari University, Venice. He published research on professional training. So the floor is to Michela to start with, and who will be followed by Maestro Ortombina and Andrea Erri. Please.
Hey, hi everyone. Thank you very much, Elisabetta, for the invitation. Here we are. I'm very glad to be here presenting my research on the funding the arts effect of creativity, which is a joint work with Petra Moser, who unfortunately, as Elisabetta said, can't be with us today. So the foundation of this research comes from the fact that there is an intense debate for publicly funding the arts. On the one hand, arts and culture should be funded because they may increase economic development by attracting new businesses and new economic activities, but also because past research has shown that creativity and innovation are passed across generations in the same location. And so we can think that financing the arts could create positive spillovers, especially in areas that are poorer or underserved. On the other hand, however, arts are public goods and therefore are exposed to financial strain. And this is something that we are experiencing today, where we see that the share of public fundings for the arts, in particular theaters, is decreasing both in the US and in Europe, but also because when arts is funded with taxpayer money, they may have a say on the content of the artistic output, meaning that this can increase the dependence of artists on wealthy patrons, giving them less chances to innovate as to have to please who is providing money. debate, there is a big open question, which is, but what is really the effect of funding the arts on creativity? A question whose answer is very challenging. First of all, because it's hard to find variation in public funding in modern settings, but also because it's challenging to measure the creative output in terms of quantity and quality over years. So what we're doing in this paper is taking advantage from a unique historical episode that happened in Italy after unification, so after 1861, when the new kingdom of Italy took the burden of all the war debt of pre-unitarian individual states. And in order to adjust the budget, it was forced to abolish all the central funding for public theaters in 1867. Now, the funding rules for the theaters were mostly established at the time of foundation, so in majority of Italian public theaters at the beginning of the 18th century, and composed of a share of revenues coming from public funding called dote, sales of concessions, so gambling, food, rent wardrobes that were pretty popular at the time, as well as private contract with the wealthiest families, also called palchettisti. So if you look at how the dote, the share of public funding, evolved between 1750 and 1866, we can see that it was mostly stable, had very little variation, but it dramatically dropped in 1867 and remained at a substantial lower level until the beginning of World War I, when our data ends. The public funding cut strongly affected theater performance, also of the most notable ones. La Fenice, for instance, was forced to cancel the carnival season 5 times between 1872 and 1897. Teatro La Pergola suffered major cuts that marked the start of a miserable life of these theaters. A lot of artists, including Verdi, complain about how little the newly formed Kingdom of Italy has done for music. The fact that the rules of funding the theaters were established at the time of their funding and were almost unchanged determine a substantial variation of the exposure of the theaters to the funding cut. So if we look at the percentage of funding that was coming from public sources in 1866, we can see that while some theater relied almost nothing on the public fundings, some were only relying on public fundings. More than 80% of their income was coming from public funding, with an average 44% of theater's income coming from the government. So what we're doing in our analysis is exactly exploiting these differences in order to see what was the effect of the exposure to the funding cut on creativity. To be a little bit more technical, what we're doing is comparing the changes in creative output across theaters that were differentially exposed to the funding. So we look at several measures of creative output in theater I, year T, and we regress these variables on an indicator for the exposure to the funding cut and exposure to the funding cut post 1867, controlling for the fact that theaters could have a different creative output to begin with, and also that the thesis or in general the pattern of creative output can follow a specific trend unrelated to the funding. Of course, a potential concern is that the funding cut so the different exposure to the funding cut was also related to some theater characteristics that can also affect creativity. For instance, when the theater were funding, how big they were, how much they were producing. So what we're doing is checking that the exposure to the public funding cut is not related to the theater characteristics. And as this table shows, it seems to be the case. Like older theater, bigger theater, theater that were already more productive are not systematically associated to a larger or lower extent to public funding. Based on this, we look at three main outcomes. So first of all, we want to see what happened to the total production of the theaters. Then what we find is that a 10 percentage point increase in the exposure to the funding cut reduce the total production by 8.2%. This, of course, is a measure that captured the entire creative output of the theaters, but we would like to know more about the composition of this decrease. So what we do is looking at the share of different performance that the theaters are putting in place. We look at the premieres and the new production as an expression of new form of arts versus the repertory work that were mostly based on the reuse of content that was already in possession of the theaters. And what we find indeed is that the more novel content, proxy by premieres and new production, strongly decrease upon a funding cut, while the repertoire work increases. So we can argue that there was a shift in the production of the theaters for more innovative pieces to more traditional ones. And if we look at how persistent these effects were, so we look at the effects year by year between 1867 and 1913, we can see that there was a dramatic jump in the total amount of premieres. That slightly theaters seems to cope with this, so that the number of new of the total output gradually increase, but it never recovers until World War. We also have some additional results that I will briefly touch on in the interest of time. So the fact that funding cuts also affect the genre of performance. We are moving from highbrow pieces like operas and operettas to light fare, like commedia dell'arte. But also that the effects of the funding cuts are stronger in lower income regions. So if we look, for instance, at areas that are at the bottom of the income per capita distribution, the effects, the negative effects on the total output are 3 times larger than in areas that are at the top of the income distribution. The effects are 5 times larger in cities that are smaller, and the effects also strongly depends on the competition that in a city may exist across different theaters. So if a theater has a single, if a city has a single theater, the effects are 10 times larger than in cities that have more than 2 theaters. In a way, we can think that there is a reallocation of the creative activity across different theaters if a city has the capacity to do so. The third result that we establish is that in the long run, theaters that were more exposed to the funding cuts were more likely either to shut down or to change the core business, in particular to be replaced by moving theaters that were that start spreading around Italy at the beginning of the 20th century. So either the theater shut down or they change their core business into more innovative industry like movie theater, which was also an industry that rely on the reuse of an established content instead of the creation of new ones for every show. Okay, so to conclude, what we've done in this research is studying the effect of funding cut in Italy after unification and look at its effect on creativity. We find that a higher exposure to the funding cut reduced the total number of performance of a theater, decreased the content novelty of the production that the theater is putting in place, and that the reduction in creativity is stronger in areas that have lower. Finally, we show that theaters that were more exposed to the cuts were more likely to either close down or become moving theaters. What are the policy implications of this work? So first of all, we think that cutting public findings may weaken the positive externalities that the arts create, with potential negative effect on innovation. But also, I think that an interesting finding of our research is that areas that are poorer or among underserved population, the effect of funding cuts could be more serious. And so it's something to take into account even today in public policies if we are deciding among the allocation of funding for theaters across areas of different level of economic. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to discuss further with you.
Thank you very much, Michela. Now the floor is to Andrea, and we hope also to Fortunato, if he can join us.
Yes. Yes.
Good afternoon, welcome.
Good afternoon, many thanks. Good afternoon to all of you. So, can we start?
Please.
Yeah. So, I'm here with Andrea. Andrea is I am the superintendent. He is the general director of La Fenice, and it's a real pleasure, I would say, an honor to talk about this topic to an English university. Even because by chance it happens that just this morning I was having a very hard negotiation with Covent Garden about a co-production. So it's very nice, very funny to talk to you now. But anyhow, let's talk about La Fenice. La Fenice is, as I say always, is the most beautiful theater all around the world. Is in a special town, which is maybe is even inappropriate to say town. Venice is not a town, but we have to work with the rule of rules that comes from the Italian law and come from a very wide market involving all around the world, as well as UK, for this co-production that I was mentioning before. So very often it happens to talk about, or to hear also from our side, about Fenice production model. So, and we are very proud about that, because it's something that already 15 years ago, more or less, facing a new world that was the world after the huge crisis. Everybody of you, I'm sure, will remember about Lehman Brothers, the economical crisis that came after 2008, and that it was it meant 1 year after what happened in the States that time, it meant immediately cut from everybody, mainly from the Italian government. We are a foundation, but the majority of our funding comes from the states. The states is providing more or less, the Italian government is providing more or less, I would say the 45% more or less of our full budget. But we were in a time very difficult because in more than one opera house in Italy, they started in 2009 to don't be anymore able to pay regularly the salary to the musician, to all the employee. And of course, the only cost that it was possible to compress, to reduce, it was the expenses for artistic projects, because you cannot don't pay the salary, of course, in order to have the peace, at least, inside the house. But we looked very carefully to all the elements of the table. There were our employees, more or less 300 people, chorus, orchestra, technicians, administrative department. There was the public, the audience, how the audience was composed in 2008, 2009. And then there was on the same table as another ingredient, another parameter to make choices, to combine in order to make choices, the programming. And instead of reduce the expenses for artistic project, we studied a model in order to get the money that has been cut by the government, by the private sponsor, by everybody, to compose a project, a season, a model of season, where it was possible to get the same amount that was cut from sure supporter, getting this money from the box office. And after many possible combination, we arrived we arrived to a point where we realized that it would have been absolutely a big mistake to reduce the artistic offer to the audience, but came out that there was the possibility to make it double. So we passed from a season with 45 performances of opera with 8 titles, 45 performances. In the following season, we arrived at 105 performances. And of course, it was that meant that all of a sudden, so we have been able to compensate all the cuts that has been really furious, I would say, because they came all of a sudden and for a huge amount of money. We saw that many other theaters in Italy, they were cutting the salaries also, with a lot of musicians that left. So it was a big crisis. But we understood that in terms of properly of culture, what Italian culture, what music, what opera meant. And when I mean opera, of course, opera is an Italian product. Opera was born in Italy, is a kind of miracle that happened at the end of the Renaissance, when after painting, sculpture, architecture, literature came out, opera. We know that opera was born in 1600, more or less, and so it is, as you know, a very Italian product. But there was not only the proposal of the offer of Italian music in La Fenice. Also, there was the offer of Austrian music, German music, American music, English music, of course. I remember very well when in that season we produced Mikado by Gilbert and Sullivan. And it has been taken by an incredible curiosity and success by the audience. So, of course, to produce it meant also to change the point of view. So once upon a time, when there is an important date in this, about this kind of reflection, that is 2007, September 2007, when Luciano Pavarotti died. When he disappeared, there was a change of attitude by the audience and by the singers, by the artists at the same time. It means, I mean, once upon a time, when Luciano Pavarotti was singing La Bohème or Rigoletto, everybody was running, trying to find a ticket. When he was singing these operas, you were sure that you had sold out. But after he died, and more or less we are in the same period when we decided to create this model, so there was a doubt. Did all that people run to buy a ticket because they wanted to listen to Luciano Pavarotti singing La Bohème, or a certain percent of this flood of people was also because they wanted, they couldn't renounce to listen La Bohème itself? So we discovered that there is, in the sense of identity of this country, but I mean for every country in the world, the opera is a kind of storytelling, let's say, that has been still very, very attractive by billions of people, even without anymore the artists of that generation. And so that it meant also that it was possible in the budget to consider different costs. So for the same money that you used before to produce an opera, you discover, studying carefully, because of course, when you are producing an opera like Parsifal, of course, you have to go in a certain market for the singer. If you want to produce L'Elisir d'Amore, you go in another market, and then you can find young singers producing in the space of La Fenice the same attraction of the big names. So what came out, it is that in our fundraising, where you look where it's possible to find money, we discovered that there was a huge, an immense endowment, let's say, that we had by the music itself. And considering every time carefully how to perform the music, it was the key to get a big result in terms of budget, in terms of money, in terms of equilibrium, and in terms also of many more people crossing the door of La Fenice to attend the performance.
It's my turn now, just a couple of minutes to understand the features of what Mr. Fortunato Ortombina said before. I would start with the accounting numbers of 2019, because the result of this policy was a huge amount of ticket selling. About 10 million at the box office and 1 million for the guided visits. Because in fact, we discovered that as a second business of this theater, we have about 150,000 of visitors of the theater without attending any performance. So it's another business for us. Then we had about 20.7 million of contribution by the public sector and 2.3 million euro by the sponsors. So the total income was about 35 million euro. But as you know, we passed through the flood at the end of 2019. You have an image just to understand what we suffered of, and then on the COVID period that has transformed also our philosophy for more than 2 years. If you see these numbers, the budget of 2020 was for ticketing about 10 million euro and was reduced to 3.5. And if you consider that the half of this amount was done in January and half February before the COVID start, you have an idea of what we suffered. The old model was not enough for covering the losses that we had. So for the cost, also you have an idea of our costs, but we reduce the cost correspondingly to the loss of revenues. The post-COVID strategies were for us, and for that we want to close our presentation, to increasing promotion, engagement, and new target. As you can see on this slide, we have created another target, the under 35, the subscription of tomorrow, offering them a party and then giving them the possibility to assist to a concert or an opera. Then reducing opera performances to cut costs and increasing concert. The third strategy is investing in our most iconic events, to develop the image of our theater as cultural agora of Venice, point of contact, point to develop the sense of community of people, and then increasing our online fan base. Because in fact, during that period, we increased our online presence, achieving the number of fast 150,000 subscribers in our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Maestro Ortombina and Andrea Erri for this second presentation. So there is a lot of material for thoughts, for discussion. As Maestro Ortombina mentioned, of course, Venice is a very particular situation, a very particular context, but it is really striking to compare the situation of Venice with historically thinking with the inequalities that defunding can cause between a richer north of Italy and a relatively poorer south of the country. Yes, please. Please unmute yourself.
Okay? It's okay now?
Yes.
Sorry, every time that I hear somebody telling that Venice is a particular place, so is very lucky because there are so many tourists, and so we are more lucky than other places all around the world. Sorry, I react immediately. So I hope you excuse my reaction that I try.
I've never said the lucky. Actually, I'm half Venetian from my mother's side,
no,
and
but I wanted, yeah, listen.
My highest opera attendance is at La Fenice and
yes, but I have to say, I have to be correct towards not only me, but towards all the people who worked with me, to the structure of La Fenice and to the audience, that the real value, the real new value that was considered, it was the value of the literature, of the music, the value of the operas, the value of musical theater in the heart of the people. And this is something that is not related to Venice. This is something that I have, because when normally they say, because in Venice you have a tourist. It's not your case. I know you are very well prepared. But normally they say that. But where is it in Italy that we do not have tourism? So would you like to say that in Firenze there is no tourism, that in Napoli there is no tourism, that in Rome there are no tourism, in Torino, the very industrial town where there is the museum, the Egyptian museum, one of the museum that one of the most visited in Europe. So tourists are everywhere. What we have to have the courage to test is how the people were living here around. There was people living here around that never came to La Fenice before. And here there is a point of culture, a point of also of generation. Before us to start this model with La Fenice, there was the subscribers, and the subscribers, they were families having a box or a chair since before the war, always the same family. And when you have this fidelity of these people, with the money coming from the States, more or less, you have your 70% of full sold out every night. Why do you have to search for other borders? No, the point it was to discover with a different variety of programming. For example, when in this programming, the Sistema Fenice is a mixture of the ancient Sistema Stagione and repertory system from the German country. We discovered that making a mixture, of course, you have to provide new production every year, but also because you have a sense of novelty, a sense of something that you are very strong, and so. But to give every year 10 is the number of the production we have to provide is not enough. The experience with the culture and the art, it is to go every time deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And so we discover that when we revive, because we have a lot of production that we revive, when we revive La Traviata rather than Il Barbiere di Siviglia, we discover every year an increasing number of people who already saw and they come back to see. And that is an effect, like, what in the economics they say, the snowball, no? That you move the ball of snow and it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. But if I have to save one element who has been really the engine of this movement that brought us to be perfectly in financial equilibrium with an incredible number of spectators. If I have to save one element, the most important element, it was to look at with trust to the audience, because we think that the audience coming is not just giving us the price of a single ticket. For every single ticket, we have somebody who gives us 3 hours of his life. And 3 hours of life, it costs much more than the 200 euro for the premiere of La Traviata. Sorry, finished.
Thank you. And talking about a snowball, we have a question from Jen Snowball in the chat, and she addressed to Michela, but also to the second presentation. So let me read it. Related to the first, but also the second presentation, it seems likely that the impact of the falling funding around the COVID times is going to have long-lasting negative impacts on cultural production. Would you agree? And what can cultural organizations do to recover more quickly and perhaps be more resilient to future shocks? So Michela, perhaps would you like to reply first?
Thank you for the question. I totally agree. Actually, when we start working on this paper, it was in April 2020, so just when the COVID started hitting, and one of the idea of looking at the long-term effect was exactly wondering how persistent the COVID shock would have been. So yes, absolutely. In terms of what the cultural organization can do in order to recover more quickly, I think that there could be more investment in the human capital, especially today, as the second presentation has highlighted. There is the possibility of exploiting a little bit more long-term cooperation between theater and artists. This is something that in the 20th century was particularly challenging because most artists had to strongly rely on the single payment performance in order to survive. And after the funding cut, there was also a substantial migration of Italian artists to other European countries. So I think that having perhaps a little bit more long-lasting relationship with musicians, actors, singers could have the theater to offset these negative effect, and this is something which also the institution, cultural institution, but also government could help even in moments of financial distress like COVID.
Thank you, Michela. Perhaps Andrea or Fortunato would like to add something.
As before, I think we have to look carefully to every face of a spectator when he's crossing the door and when he's sitting down. I have to say, as I am sovrintendente, but I am also artistic director. And normally when I arrive at the premiere, I know already by heart the show. So I don't need to look at the show. But the real show for me is to stay in a lateral box and look at the faces of the people. And La Fenice is not so big. We have only 1,000 seats. So it's not difficult to, even from 20 meters, to see the face, how they react. Maybe from time to time also to discover somebody who is sleeping. It happens also because you have in 1,000 people, you have different reaction. But what, so I understand when Michela says to invest more in the human capital. So this is what we did actually, because now we are, there was a time where it was not possible, especially after the long crisis of after Lehman Brothers, after 2008, it was forbidden to engage permanently a worker. It has been forbidden over 10 years. Now it became possible, but of course you have to show that you are able to sustain what you are doing. So you cannot engage somebody and after 2 years to say him, sorry, we don't have any more money to pay your salary. Please go to work nearby here. There is a bar. They are looking for waiters. It's not something we can do, because the point is to make, from the human point of view, stronger and stronger and stronger. When you take new musician, they have to come in the group and be able to play as they have to play in this group, and that make with fresh forces, it makes even stronger the artistic energy of the house. But what is that looking at the faces of the spectator, what the spectator themselves after the pandemic, they are looking more deeply. They are expecting more coming to the theater than before. That is something I tasted and I checked with my hands, with my smell, with my discussion. I do every time with people in the audience during the intermission. I see, and that means that I tell you, during the pandemic, after the end of the pandemic, we made some production in a very, let's say, in a very, not aggressive, but let's say in a very modern and updated style, okay? And we did one production of La Traviata where Violetta was, because Violetta, there is a coincidence, Violetta is dying not for COVID, but something like that, more or less the same. So it was set down in an hospital, and the full opera was done as a flashback of all the story. And I was expecting to be booed, as it would have happened before the pandemic. After the pandemic, it didn't happen. And this just to give you one example of, and I could tell you 10 and 10, many example of this, or how people now are working more deeply to what they are looking. So when they sit down and they expect that the curtain opens, each one of them is really expecting something more than before.
So opera can always be current. I think there is a question from Carol.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you also for the great two presentations. My question is about well, the focus on how creativity is you know, supposedly a function of access to funding only, and this comment is because, well, money is, it's just one of the aspects of the funding contract. What about other agreements or perhaps unwritten expectations that affect creativity, that affect artistic freedom? So I'm thinking here about situations where, well, nowadays some controversial pieces are cancelled because of the government or patrons, perhaps in the past. In other cases, those who pay, well, patrons, may impose certain expectations regarding the repertoires. So I wonder what have been the practices in Italy in the past, and also nowadays, but especially, I guess, the past is what fascinates me. Thank you.
I think I can get started, and I agree with you, Carol. Of course, the funding that theaters have access to is only one component of creativity. And in Italy, there were some censorship laws that were passed in the pre-unitarian stage, and then the Kingdom of Italy adopted them starting in 1865, that were controlling the type of content that could be included in operas. And in the past, there were, especially in that particular historical moment in Italy, there were two major concerns. One was, of course, for inappropriate content. The other one was for political propaganda. So the fact that operas and in general theater performance were used to spread the quote-unquote revolutionary ideas and pushing the movement for unification. And also Verdi, for instance, was involved in those. So yes, and so we can think that the operas that were performed, in our data that we only have a performance that went on stage, are in a way those that have passed this censorship bar, this censorship police, and not all the production that in principle a theater would have put in place.
Please unmute yourself. Yes.
No, if I understood the question at some point, it was asking if some who are giving money, they try to impose things. I have to say, this doesn't happen. I am much older of everybody of you, I see, and I remember 20 years ago, it happened from time to time that somebody was giving money. I remember I was working in La Scala, and they were trying to not only to promote, but really to push artists because they were giving us money. Then we tried to react also that time because La Scala was La Scala. But I would say nowadays, also everybody understood when I mentioned before the death of Luciano Pavarotti, that has been a year zero in the sense of what is a star, for example. So to have a star, you need the star, but you need also a huge amount of people looking at the star to recognize the star as a star. I would say now, so we never received any kind of interference about repertory, absolutely. But I would say even more. Nowadays, we're giving money. Once upon a time, you know, there was the mecenat in the old fashion. So there was somebody who was incredibly in love of some dancers like Rudolf Nureyev, or some conductors like somebody who is still conducting, not anymore in Europe, but still conducting, Valery Gergiev, for example. Valery Gergiev, he has got a huge, an immense amount of money with donation of people who was just taken by this sense of, but he has got so many money that I think it's not worthwhile to take it as an example. He's absolutely out. But if I think to our sponsor, they want to look how a project it works. So if I am able to show them a good project on instead of Mozart or Verdi, on Gianfrancesco Malipiero, who is a Venetian composer, important in the 20th century, but not the same way of Verdi or Wagner or Mozart. If they see that there is interest around this project because it's a curiosity, because he's a Venetian composer, because of many reasons, so when they see that you have been able to guess an investment, next time they will make you even more free. So they more than a prejudice, by coming from a culture, from their education, they are looking to the real sense with a real sense of investment. So you look the project where we have people fighting out of the door in order to come here to give money and put their name on the ticket in the queue out of the door of Andrea, who is the man who is collecting all the money.
All the money.
You see that they want normally they want much more to put money on the under 35 project rather than to another project with a great stage director and a great conductor. So they have a real sense, and these are, I have to say, is something that I appreciate. I see that in these 20 years, changed the attitude of many people, and I see that they look at the culture. It can be music, can be everything, can be the university, can be whatever your school, whatever you want, but looking properly as an investment of their money. Because, of course, what comes back as an image when you have 1,000 boys and girls, they come to listen to Sacre du Printemps by Stravinsky with a young conductor. No, the last time it was with a girl, Joana Carneiro from Portugal, conducting. And when they come and they hear how the applauding, because they are young. So if you take people 80 years old, the noise of the hands in the applauding is much less than people who applaud to Stravinsky, as well as they would applaud Elton John. Sorry, I say Elton John because it was my age. I don't know in your generation who is now. Sorry, I am too old. I am not updated about that. But they applaud with the sense, with the same energy, because also they have been able to come in a place for many, many years, not forbidden, but almost forbidden by a prejudice. Okay, so I would say we are in a moment where everybody wants to show that they have nothing against Russia. So they have a lot against Putin, but nothing against Tchaikovsky, nothing against Shostakovich, nothing against Zemlinsky or many others. But they are, if they can support a project on a Russian composer, possibly with a young Russian, they are even more happy. And of course, we agree about that. So as we have to trust the potential spectator, because listen, we have spoken now about Putin. All the dictators in the past, they always recognized the how sovereign, the superiority of opera towards themselves. So when in the 30s, the family Wagner was having a crush, an internal crush that put in danger the festival, Adolf Hitler, he took the car and he went to Bayreuth to speak with themselves, being with humility, being a kind of ambassador of the German, trying to let them, to guide them to the peace. Okay, and that happened to Mussolini, our Mussolini. Mussolini, there I could tell you many stories how he always told. For example, there was a particular anti-fascist in Italy, the greatest conductor of ever, Arturo Toscanini, that everybody knew that he was an anti-fascist, but Mussolini recommended to all the fascists, don't touch him, because if people could then react against us, because even in the fascists, they recognize how great he is conducting Verdi, Wagner, Bellini, and Rossini. So that means that these, we have a lot of elements coming from the history of art, from the history, and from all the studies that we can do, how high is the position in the sense of community of the people of all around the world. And I think that not only we understood and we have been able to survive in very difficult time because of the Fenice system, production system, but I see that also the sponsor, they are looking a lot in this way.
Thank you. I think we have very quickly time for a very last question. Giuliano, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question for Mr. Erri and Mr. Ortombina. Regarding the productions that are more linked to the territory, like I'm thinking of Acqua Granda, Le Baruffe, what is the contribution of these productions to the yearly income? And if you have different types of sponsors, and if you can give us some insights on the type of audience that attend these productions.
Le Baruffe, about Le Baruffe, we have been sponsored by a publishing house who has the national edition of Goldoni. So coming Le Baruffe Chiogiotte by a play of Goldoni, they gave us 100,000 euro to put it in the budget of the project. And then, of course, then Andrea is very clever in looking for every subject where Prosecco could be related. And so he knows by heart all the geography of all the hills and the different kind of Prosecco between Treviso and Belluno, where to go to propose to become a sponsor of a project. And usually he comes back with a lot of money.
Yeah, of course, our Prosecco has a special name, Belcanto.
Belcanto, yes, it's true. Sorry, but now we don't want to transform this very high debate in a commercial occasion. But about, I have to say, when we decided to do Le Baruffe Chiogiotte, I had the doubt that we would have been sold out. I'll tell you frankly before. Because I saw that the score was coming out in a very hard way. But when I saw the sold out every night, and the sold out with, let's say, 80% of people from this region, many people who never came to see Il Trovatore and La Traviata, they came to see Le Baruffe Chiogiotte. And this, you know, there is another point. And that is, it helped us a lot with Vivaldi, for example. Vivaldi, you know, to do the Baroque, it was not so sure as investment, but we did the Orlando Furioso by Vivaldi. And I saw in the audience a lot of people who never attending a piece, never attended an opera, but they came because at the gymnasium, at the school, Liceo Classico and so weiter, they read L'Orlando Furioso by Ludovico Ariosto. Everybody read Orlando Furioso by Ludovico Ariosto. And so a lot of people came to see how they've been, let's say, initiated to the opera via the literature that they studied 40 years before when they were at school. And they discovered that Vivaldi is very spectacular, and then they started to come. But here it was for just to mention you, Goldoni was Veneto, Venetian. Vivaldi was Venetian, but the subject, they didn't come for Vivaldi. Yeah? They came because they remember how nice, how romantic also it was when they were boys and girls to read L'Orlando Furioso by Ariosto. And the same happened with Acqua Granda, because I think that, I don't know if in Italy you have another town where you can find a natural element so aggressive sequentially every year as the Acqua Alta in Venice. So you could find the wind, Bora in Trieste, for example, no? But so aggressively, and then, you know, Acqua Alta is an element, is very perverted, because after the aqua disappear, is coming, aqua rise, destroy everything in the underground of the houses, but then when the water disappear after 6 hours, the town is more beautiful than before, because the aqua clean the streets, then you don't know what happens in the canteen, what happens in the underground of the houses. So is an element that is still in the feeling of the people, and everybody has in the family somebody who remembered the flood of 1966. So now, Andrea, we are lucky because in 2019 we had even a stronger acqua alta than the acqua alta of 50 years before. So we know that when probably we will be already dead in 50 years, who will be here in replacing you and me, I am sure they will do something around the acqua alta of 2019. I'm sure, because that is, you know, in every place you have something about in the sense of community, in the sense of town, that left a lot of signs, let's say, in the memory of you, of your family, and these are things that brings a lot of people to see the operas.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, time has come to an end for us. We would like to discuss for hours because I'm pretty sure we are all strong lovers of opera here at this seminar. We touch upon very important aspects of performing arts, in particular opera, funding in terms of timely and long-term resilience, investment in human capital, not only the human capital constituted by artists, but also by the audience, also in a long-term perspective. We also touch upon possible constraints of funding in terms of artistic freedom. And by this very interesting discussion between our speakers today, which I would like to recall and to thank very much Michela Giorcelli, also on behalf of Petra Moser, who could not be among us, Fortunato Ortombina and Andrea Erri. We also consider many different ways to think about artistic creativity, and not only for the purpose of possibly measuring it. So I would like to thank you a lot, all of you, for being here today, for your amazing contribution to the Cultural Economics online seminar, and also, of course, the audience for their comments and questions. Thank you very much.
All of you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, and go to the opera. Go to the opera.
Of course, ci vediamo alla Fenice.
Opera. Scusi,
al Malibran.
Signor Picchi, di dov'è lei, signor Picchi?
Sono di Roma.
Ah, Roma.
Vivo a Milano.